So today's readings deal with topics that I think we in modern time and perhaps people everywhere would rather avoid. The readings deal with sickness and death. And I would imagine we do our best to avoid, as best we can, sickness and death, right? Have we been successful at avoiding death today? Yes, we have. As best as we can. Those are reasonable things. We do our best to navigate. We, try to be healthy and, that's a reasonable, idea. But I think if we're honest with ourselves, and if people are honest with themselves, there is much in us that is afraid of sickness and death. We do our best to avoid talking about him. And that's unreasonable. And I know people don't like to talk about it because, I was, in my own experience as a precocious young child, I came to realize I like to talk about things that adults didn't like to talk about, which didn't make sense to me because these seemed to be important things. I remember, it's like when you get to family function, you're like, bring up a topic and like, why aren't we talking about this? Like I remember back in '92 being at a family function and I was asking around what people thought about that presidential election that year. Like, what are your thoughts on the funny guy with the big ears, the saxophone guy, and the guy with the bird VP? I was 9. What do you expect? I thought I was a deep thinker, but that was where I was at. I was at least thinking about it. But I remember no one wanted to talk about it. And even then, it was still something, we don't talk about it. Even religion, as faithful as our family was, is like trying to talk about deep things about religion, like things that deal with your immortal soul. These are, even at that age, I was like, why aren't we talking about this? Same thing too. Remember asking my parents at probably a younger age than they expected about if they had their funeral arrangements thought about. I thought those were important things to consider. Considering how much they cost. I mean, Mom and Dad, think of your children. There was no better birthday present I got from my dad that a few years ago he showed me the monument in the cemetery with our names on it. It's like, oh, thank you, Dad. That's one less thing I have to worry about. But I think we avoid these conversations. We see this in our world. I mean, we try to, it's not healthy. Because it's a denial of reality. We have such a hard time with these topics that we've even created stories to tone down the reality. Maybe perhaps when imagine when a child dies, like the child we call Talitha in the gospel today, we feel the temptation to say, well, God must have wanted another angel with him in heaven. It's not true. God does not go around killing babies and little children because his angel inventory is low. And besides, the whole concept of people becoming angels after they die is bad theology. It's a whole other thing it's a little stick in my craw. Angels are different beings than human beings, including dead human beings. Human beings do not become angels, and angels do not become human beings. This is a whole touched by an angel, screwed up that piece of theology. Oh! And I think I understand the temptation for this, or even like the wanting to help someone through a moment, but like sometimes even you see this with parents and adults can make a huge mistake when they tell their children that, grandma or grandpa died because God wanted them to be in heaven with him. But then when you find you have to deal with a child who's become angry with God for killing grandma and grandpa. Not helpful. And our fictions about death even extend to our pets, some say go to doggy heaven, cat heaven, or what have you. I remember some years ago, a mother brought her 9-year-old little boy to me one day and asked, He asked a question that was bothering him since his pet rabbit died. He asked, if my rabbit went to bunny heaven, can a dog in a doggy heaven jump the fence and start chasing him? I told him the dogs didn't chase bunnies in heaven. This could have been an opportunity for deeper theological conversation about this, but I think that would suffice him at that moment. I was going to wait till he got a little older to go a little deeper. Right? But sometimes we don't always want to deal with kind of these conversations regarding life after death. Let's face it, most of us cannot understand the very fact of this, so we put it all on God's shoulders sometimes. We might say it's God's will, we say when a person dies. No, it isn't. To say that it is God's will is to say that God does evil things. See, if God is all good, and he is, how can he do evil things? Did God have an off day? Aside from the fact, from when he created my voice, my singing voice, God did not have an off day. How can we understand why that poor lady in the gospel was suffering for years from hemorrhages, or why Jairus' daughter should die? How can we understand why good people that you know and I know have become terribly sick or have died? Now, maybe we can't answer. We might not be able to answer some of those questions, but we certainly are wrong when we pass the blame off to God. See, the author of the first reading from the Book of Wisdom does not make this mistake, nor is he afraid to tell it like it is, to tell the truth. Our reading began today with his telling us, God did not make death, nor does he rejoice in the destruction of the living. He made everything wholesome and good. He formed humanity to be imperishable, made in the image of his own nature. But through the envy of the devil, death entered into the world. See, this is something that we don't necessarily always want to hear. Sickness and death are the result of sin. Now, most often this is not the result of the sins of the person who gets sick or dies, but it is due to the consequences of sin in the world. And now it can be tempting to just pass the blame onto Adam and Eve, but that takes us out of the picture. We're not all that innocent. Because look, would there be wars if pride and greed and other sins did not exist? No, there would be no reason for war. But these sins do exist in good people like Edith Stein and Anne Frank, and the millions of innocent people who died during the conflicts of the last century all suffer the result of those sins. And mind you, don't just think of wars in terms of the global scale. We have wars within our own families. Now, they may not result in, people pulling out weaponry and having and suffering bloodshed, but think in our family, some of us may have had a good war or two, right? Grudges and fights, stemming from pride and greed. Ask yourselves, would human trafficking exist if lust and greed did not exist? Would there be STDs if people never sinned with their bodies? No. But these sins do exist, and those held captive by the sex industry or tricked into joining it for the love of money or forced into it to support a drug habit or what have you, all suffer the result of these sins. There's no such thing as a victimless crime. Every click on a porn site enriches pimps somewhere and continues to enslave mostly women, increasingly number of young men too. But we don't want to hear that our own participation in sin results in others suffering sickness and death. And so we blame Adam and Eve. Or worse, we blame God. Remember, God did not create evil. In 1 John chapter 1 says, God is light, in him there is no darkness at all. So now after hearing all that, is there hope for this world? Yes, there's hope. There's hope because Christ is in this world. We learned today how he healed that lady and how he raised up that child. We know that he alone has power over sickness and death. Right? We're convinced that there are many who have returned to health due to the direct intervention of the Lord of life. And we also know that those who believe in him with their lives, but who do not return to health, those who do die, in fact remain alive with him. We believe in the gift of Christ's resurrection. Why else do we come here every Sunday? Right? We live in this truth. You know, I remember when my maternal grandfather passed. I remember the thought that entered my head was a little weird. Granted, there were a lot of thoughts at that age that were a little weird, but you know, what the heck, I was 15. But I just remember my reaction to hearing the news, you know, I felt a little odd, but it's like at the same time, normal. You know, have you ever one of those moments? So my grandfather, this is back in '99, I was a freshman in high school, and he had gone in to get a pacemaker installed. You know, it's like going to the garage and getting a new part in the car. And we all expected him to come home. And he's there in the successful surgery. He's in recovery. And for whatever reason, his body rejected the part. It happens. It happens. And you know, and he was the grandparent that I was probably closest to, probably closest alike in personality. But I just remember when I heard the news, it was not like this crippling like desire to cry or like a breaking down. It was, that lucky son of a gun. It was like one of these things, like, you know, he's because I knew where his heart was. I knew where he was with the Lord. I knew kind of like, now granted, I still pray for him, and you know, I don't presume, but at the same time, I'm like, there's something, he's taken the next step of the journey, and it was like, there was an element of rejoicing that came in that I'm like, It was almost like the first time that like it all clicked, like living in the light of the resurrection in this particular moment, and it confronted me. I'm like, You know, in fact, sometimes I've cried more over his death in recent years because there's times I catch myself. At this age, I would love to have conversation with him more. You know, when I get to this point, like, how did you experience life? What did you do? You know, in a more mature fashion. That's what I'm sad for, more so than losing him. But that's why I come here every Sunday, and I know he's here with me. I know he's around this altar, praying with us. And that's the thing, we believe in that gift of resurrection. We believe he gave us his life to those who accept him, not just with words, but with their lives. And so we believe in baptism. For baptism, we receive the spiritual life of the Trinity. And so we hold on to Jesus Christ with all our might, because he alone makes sense of the confused reality of life. We entrust our dead to the Lord, seeking his mercy and compassion, asking him to reward them for the goodness of their lives and forgive them for their participation in sin. We ask the Lord to help us transform the world from its slavery to sin by giving us the courage to fight sin in our own lives. God did not make death, the first reading proclaims. He made life, eternal life. And this eternal life is not something just in the far-off future for us. See, we, the baptized, have been given the gift of this life. Lord, help us each and every day to live the reality of this eternal life, now and for all eternity.